Hey everybody, it's Lon.TV, and it's time once again for your weekly wrap-up, and we're going to talk a little bit more about Locast today because there are some new developments in the case since we last talked about this a few days ago. And part of what we're going to explore in light of some of the new things that have happened in the case is whether or not the hubris of the Locast founder contributed to its demise. We've got a lot to look at, so let's get to it. Now this video today is kind of a sequel to one we did a few days ago about Locast shutting down its operations. To give you a quick recap on what Locast is, it was a nonprofit organization that allowed people to stream their over-the-air broadcasts on the internet. You could watch it on your phone, your computer, your smart TV, whatever else you've got that can play video could bring in the Locast service. They charge people a $5 donation per month to get the service, and as you can imagine, it was very, very popular, especially for people like me who live in an area where we can't get anything with an antenna. This is something that I think provided a lot of value to people and was very, very affordable. And the federal law actually allows nonprofits to do this kind of retransmission, provided they are not charging more than what it costs to operate the service in the first place. The problem here, though, is that Locast was bringing in more than what was required to provide the service, and they were taking that profit essentially and expanding the service footprint to other markets throughout the United States. Now, the broadcasters, of course, were suing Locast over this service, saying it was a violation of copyright. Locast said, no, nonprofits are allowed to do this, but a judge in looking at the case said that because Locast was investing money in expansion, that was outside of the law, and ruled against Locast being completely on the up and up as far as federal statutes are concerned. Now, before we move too much further with developments in the lawsuit, I think it's important to look at who the parties are in the lawsuit. So the plaintiffs, the ones that are doing the suing, are the major U.S. broadcast networks. Looks like all of them are represented here. And they are suing an individual named David Goodfriend and the nonprofit that operates Locast called the Sports Fans Coalition New York Incorporated. And the fact that they are suing the individual and the nonprofit is significant to today's discussion. So who is David Goodfriend? Well, if you go on the Locast homepage, you'll see a nice picture of him here. He is the founder and chairman of Locast, and he's got quite a bit of experience doing law in the broadcast space. So he worked in the Clinton White House for a short time. He went from there to the FCC. From the FCC, he was a lawyer for the Dish Network, and then he left Dish Network around 2008 to start his own lobbying firm. And then around that time, he formed a nonprofit advocacy group called the Sports Fans Coalition to give sports fans, according to their language here, a greater voice in public policy impacting professional and collegiate sports. Now, we do have to dive into the Sports Fans Coalition here a bit because this is where things get a little confusing. So the Sports Fans Coalition is a nonprofit, as we saw David Goodfriend founded back in 2009. They do lobbying on behalf of sports fans. They're credited with eliminating the FCC's blackout rules. They're doing some work on sports gambling and other things. And they work as an advocacy organization for sports fans and are a nonprofit. This group is not the one that is operating Locast. The group that's operating Locast is the Sports Fans Coalition of New York Incorporated, which is a different organization than the one that Goodfriend initially founded. However, Goodfriend is the chairperson of both, although he says he's operating in a volunteer capacity on the New York chapter that operates Locast. So it's a very complicated arrangement here, but he did this to try to separate his personal liability from Locast's operations, but the broadcasters aren't buying it. Let's take a look at that. The broadcasters have filed for a permanent injunction with the court. They want the court to shut down Locast and its nonprofit and ban anyone associated with it from doing anything with Locast. Right now, Locast has chosen to shut down, but everyone involved with Locast still has control over the organization, so they could still do things. And the broadcasters want that to stop immediately. The court has not ruled on this yet. The broadcasters say in their motion that the parties in the case had agreed earlier to limit the scope of the lawsuit to just one little section in the law that we talked about in the last video, the Section 111A5 exemption. And in this agreement, the broadcasters say that if the court determines that Mr. Goodfriend and the nonprofit do not qualify for the exemption, the court should immediately enter a permanent injunction to shut down Locast, basically what they're asking for in this motion. Additionally, the broadcasters said that the defendants agreed to this provision in exchange for ample consideration, including but not limited to the plaintiffs, the broadcasters, agreeing not to pursue any financial recovery from Mr. Goodfriend and other individuals or entities who are involved with Locast. They go on to say that the plaintiffs agreed not to pursue actual damages and only to pursue a statutory award not exceeding $10,000 per infringed and eligible work. And even though this doesn't sound all that bad, they have alleged a lot of alleged works. In fact, the court documents are filled with all of these examples of different broadcasts that Locast was pushing out. So I would say the damages here could be quite substantial if they pursue them. Now, if the broadcasters decide to pursue those statutory damages, David Goodfriend could be on the hook personally for a lot of money. Every one of those examples that they have submitted in court, he could be responsible for paying statutory damages on. And this topic was the subject of a new order from the judge because Goodfriend was trying to get himself removed from the case as a defendant, leaving only the nonprofit as the defendant in the case. And what he is arguing is that because he was acting as a volunteer for the nonprofit, he should not be held liable because federal and state law protects and provides some immunity for volunteers at nonprofits that were operating in the scope of their responsibilities. But as I mentioned, the networks aren't buying that. In their argument against this motion, they said that Mr. Goodfriend has received other forms of benefits for his activities related to the Sports Fans Coalition of New York, or Locast. They say that he founded the nonprofit that operates Locast in part to benefit the other nonprofit, the Sports Fans Coalition, an advocacy organization he founded, and to benefit himself. And I took a look at that other organization's finances. Remember, this is not the one operating Locast, but the one that he founded back in 2009 to advocate for sports fans. And if we take a look at their most recent filing with the IRS, this is for the 2019 tax year, you can see that the organization brought in about $192,000 in contributions and grants, and the organization paid Mr. Goodfriend and his wife's consulting company $168,000 for lobbying and digital management services. Now, I'm not suggesting here that he was mismanaging anything. What he was doing was legal, and this is not attached to Locast in any way. But what the broadcasters are arguing here is that the work that Locast is doing benefits the other nonprofit that he's getting paid for. So even though he's not being paid by Locast, he is being paid by the other organization. And if you look back in prior tax years, you can see that he has basically paid himself and his wife's company about $454,000 in lobbying and management services for this nonprofit. Now, during one of these big trials, there's always a discovery process where people are deposed, where documents have to exchange hands. And in the course of their research on the case, the networks went through a lot of the discussions within the nonprofit about the formation of Locast. And the networks allege that in attempting to convince the Sports Fans Coalition's board of directors to take on the project of forming the second nonprofit in Locast, Mr. Goodfriend stated that he believed this would be a good fight for us to mount, particularly as it would expand our relationships with donors and new fans. Additionally, Goodfriend on his consulting webpage is listing the Locast formation as a case study, as one example of the services that his consulting firm can provide. So he's actually advertising new business based on his work that he did for Locast as a quote-unquote volunteer. They also uncovered a document by Brian Hess, who works at Goodfriend's wife's consulting company called Emmer Consulting, and is also the executive director of the Sports Fans Coalition. And in that document, Hess wrote that Locast was a vanity thing for David. He's trying to create something he can attach his legacy to regardless of the Sports Fans Coalition. I think there are real benefits that SFC can reap from this, but that's not the real motivation behind David's push on this project. And because you can discover anything in Discovery, they also found an email from Mr. Goodfriend to his mother where he wrote, "If we lose in court, I haven't lost much and probably gained a reputation as a fearless badass. Major figures have reached out to me with a quiet attaboy." Now, after reviewing the arguments, Judge Stanton's order denies David Goodfriend's request to remove himself from the case. And Judge Stanton here said while the defendant may raise that volunteer defense, he thinks there is a genuine issue of material fact whether he receives any other thing of value from his services at Sports Fans Coalition of New York, and his motion for summary judgment is therefore denied. He goes on to say that some of the facts brought up in this argument suggest that through his work at Locast, Mr. Goodfriend has gained valuable relationships with donors and fans to the benefit of himself as well as the other nonprofit, the Sports Fans Coalition, enhancing his reputation in the industry and leading to future employment and other opportunities that are worth over $500 a year. And I suspect that Locast's decision to shut down on September 2nd was because of that order and the fact that Goodfriend would be on the hook for a portion of the statutory damages. And they probably figured by shutting down right then and there, it would limit his liability. He might be able to make the argument that statutory damages shouldn't apply to anything before the judge's order about their legality and only after that order. So he may only have about 24 hours of copyright infringement he might be liable for. But if they kept operating, Goodfriend would have been on the hook for a lot more. So I suspect that that personal liability is why Locast is shut down right now. And it makes me wonder if all of the hubris that Goodfriend was expressing in the early days as he was being profiled in the New York Times and in Bloomberg clouded his judgment to a point where he really didn't lay a foundation that was going to allow Locast to survive the long term here. Clearly, they were interested in building something big that, as he wrote to his mother, he could really take credit for as being the David that took down Goliath. But I think sometimes the greater good here is not making it about you, but about the greater good. And what I think Locast can do right now, if they really do care about people's access to broadcast TV, is to release the source code before the judge puts the order down to completely wipe the Locast nonprofit off the face of the planet. And there are a lot of examples of nonprofit foundations that can manage open source code. Some of them are up on screen here, like Mozilla and Apache and LibreOffice and the Linux Foundation. There's a lot of examples of how this can work. And I think if this nonprofit manages the code, but not the retransmission, it'll allow a lot of other people to figure out the retransmission part, because there will be code that will allow anyone to pop up one of these retransmission sites. And if you got so many of them out there, the broadcasters are going to have a really hard time suing every single one of them out of existence. And I think this case has shown that as long as you don't fund expansion, you can legally operate one of these translation services, provided you make sure that the money you receive is not greater than the money it costs to operate. And I think that would be very doable. And short of that, just giving individuals the ability to do this themselves, I think would provide a lot of value. So I hope Locast releases their source code, because that would really benefit everyone and would be a nice capstone to the mission that they set out to do. Now, if you want to continue to follow the case, which I will be doing, you can head over to this great nonprofit website called Court Listener, and they've been getting all of the different documents and orders and motions that have been going back and forth in this case, and that is what I have been following to keep an eye on what's happening. Now, this week's wrap-up is being brought to you, as always, by all of you, and we have some supporters to thank this week, including Sad Nez, who contributed via Floatplane. I also want to thank Keith Robinson, who upgraded his YouTube membership. So thank you both for your support of the channel. And I want to thank everyone who's been contributing on an ongoing basis and all of you who watch on a regular basis too, because all of those things equal channel growth. And if you want to support the channel, you can. You can go to Lon.TV/support and make a monthly or a one-time contribution via my donor box page. We also support that YouTube membership program, Floatplane, and Patreon. And don't worry, I am not setting up a retransmission service anytime soon, so you don't have to worry about me getting sued out of existence. If you want to watch my existence, you can on many different platforms, including my Amazon page at Lon.TV/Amazon shop, where you can watch my live streams and many of my prior videos ad-free. So definitely check it out. You can engage with me via my very infrequent email list. We've got the Discord, which is starting to get some traction, along with the Facebook group. And then we have my store, where I sell previously used items that are pretty much new because I used them just long enough to review them here on the channel. These are a lot of the things that I purchased to review and I'm now getting rid of. And if you want to be notified whenever we add something to the store, you can go to Lon.TV/store alert to get an email notification. And that is going to do it for this week's weekly wrap-up. This Locast case is really interesting. I'm not a lawyer, but I'm very fascinated with the law, and of course I'm fascinated with cord cutting, so this is a real good one for me. Let me know what you think down in the comments below, and until next time, this is Lon Seidman. Thanks for watching.
This channel is brought to you by the Lon.TV supporters, including gold level supporters Hot Sauce and Video Games, Brian Parker, Chris Allegretta, Tom Albrecht, Thomas Anfang, Jim Tanis, and Handheld Obsession. If you want to help the channel, you can by contributing as little as $1 a month. Head over to Lon.TV/support to learn more. And don't forget to subscribe. Visit Lon.TV/s.